One important distinction that we have to keep in mind, I think, when we think of our modern world, our contemporary society, and when we think back to earlier epochs, where and when it is very tempting to think that, at least during some of those epochs, INFJs may well have thrived more as members of society and experienced less disgust at the way the world is going. What's important, I think, to keep in mind is the concept of the distinction between public and private. I'm thinking particularly of the distinction between public and private language, because those of my readers, those who have not just watched my videos, but who read my books, know that the linguistic aspect, the linguistic lens of analysis is very prevalent in my works, partly through my interest and training in this approach to philosophy, but also just linked to a strong belief that language is crucial, in tracing the connection with culture and situating us within society and if you like, the conflict of forces within society. Language is very important. And when you have INFJs nowadays who consider that they'd rather not depend on the rest of external reality, that they want to be solipsists, which is the word I use, and some INFJs among my readers, who clearly are INFJs, I can sense that from their writing, say, listen, I'm a solipsist and this is what suits me best. I have to take that into account and take that seriously, because this is the testimony of INFJs, and they know what they're talking about. We can't always assume they're lying to themselves, okay? But one important aspect that we should keep in mind is that these INFJs, the solipsists of today's society, they're not living a life that you could compare to what we imagine to be the blossoming and accomplished INFJs of a bygone era, where the qualities that are inherently associated with INFJs are easy to picture as having been more valued back then. And I think this has to do with this distinction between public and private. These INFJs of bygone years had a public existence. They were recognized and they spoke a language that was public. In other words, the contributions they made to language, to the spiritualization of the world and of culture through the spiritualization of language, was effective. It was happening in public discourse. So in a sense, they were contributing to change within society as a whole. Whereas nowadays, certainly the self-contained solipsistic INFJs who want to stay away from the world, they cultivate their NI function in many different ways. They are authentic to their NI to this extent, but they speak what you might call a private language, not a completely private language of the kind that Wittgenstein would have criticized the mere possibility of, but the language they speak is mostly restricted to themselves, right? So in a sense, it's not really penetrating the public discourse. And this is something that is very indicative and very symptomatic of the modern world. We know that the modern world tends to turn everything into specialized disciplines. It tends to compartmentalize, it tends to polarize, it tends to atomize, it tends to individualize. And one of the ways in which it does all these things is, of course, the polarization between the private and the public. So one way of combating this particular bane of modern society, this is how we look at it, is to claim for the language of INFJs, the language of NI, intuition, and perhaps to use the vocabulary of the Infinite Soul, my new book, the language of meaning making. We need to think of ways in which we can republicize this strange language that we speak. It's difficult in today's society because there's such an urge to privatizing everything, including our spiritual pastimes, our religious pastimes for those who are religious. Everything is privatized. It's okay, but we have to always be aware of the fact that when we privatize everything, we do play into the hands of the dominant zeitgeist, or the dominant ideology. Because the private is always the flip side of the public. And when we privatize everything that is meaningful, we leave the public domain completely available and the sole repository, the sole kingdom of technocratic means ends, technological thinking where meaning doesn't have a place, where the sacred doesn't have a place. All these aspects that would leave us spiritually starved as INFJs and people of other types who care about such things. They dominate the public discourse also because we leave the public discourse completely within their power. So the adaptive INFJs does this in a direct way by accepting to just publicly be like other people, get along with them, repress their NI. But the solipsistic INFJ, who is very keen and sometimes willing to sacrifice things to preserve themselves and their worldview and their personality, they also accepts that they're going to fall into the domain of the purely private, which is completely fine for the dominant zeitgeist. Sure, privatize, you're not going to be a threat. So perhaps, we could just say these INFJs don't care about being threats or changing the system. They just want to do their thing, and that's okay. But it's important to remain aware of the fact that ultimately, to really change things, to imagine a world that gets better from a spiritual viewpoint, we have to penetrate into the public discourse. And in The Infinite Soul, which you can see here, if you haven't got this book, it's available down below at all the links. It's easy to find, just have a look. There's talk about islands of spirit. I did a reading not many days ago where I introduced this notion, and I can read more about this if you're interested. Let me know in the comments if you would like me to do more readings, particularly on this concept of islands of spirit, because islands of spirit are activities not of solipsistic INFJs, but of liberated INFJs. That's my third category, which I'm yet to fully flesh out in video, but it's fleshed out in this book. They are INFJs who practice communities where, if you like, the language they speak on a non-instrumental footing. Instrumentality is means ends. It's what is not sacred. It's not meaningful, okay? They practice it with other people. Islands, because it's not going to be a lot of people, but still it's going to be within small communities, not by themselves or not in like tandem with just one other solipsistic INFJ, say. It's important to develop these islands of spirit because there is a mechanism by which the products of these, the linguistic products of those islands are going to be public products. They're going to seem private because it's going to be within communities, but in fact, there will be dialogical exchange between INFJs or NI dominants, say, that will publicize the meanings. And it can really come to integrate the language that these INFJs speak, and that can, in turn, over time, percolate into the wider discourse. It might seem like a far-sighted dream, but it's important to start. Okay, so like I said, you can also get the prequel to the Ecstatic Soul, which is the prequel to the Infinite Soul, which is the Ecstatic Soul, analysis of the existential constitution psychology of INFJs. You can get these two books if you haven't yet. And as my Patreon page it really keeps the channel afloat in these times that I try hard to keep going. And you might have noticed I make more videos and I try to kind of promote the channel more because it's it's not easy in every respect. So if you can provide me with some support, and there's a link below to Patreon, and anywhere from €3 a month, that's massively helpful. And you can talk to me directly via that platform and ask me questions. Okay, I'll see you soon, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.